So the third area of our nutritional guidelines is carbohydrates. The most controversial nutrients probably, are carbs good or are carbs bad? Should we eat them or should we not eat them? There's two types of carbohydrates that we need to think about, and very simply, you've got simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. And simple carbohydrates will be the ones that you probably like eating the most. I have to say I do. And that would include things like pasta, bread, rice, chocolate, fruit juices, sugar, cakes, anything with lots of sugar in. They're all simple carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates, on the other hand, a lot more virtuous. Your vegetables, your whole fruits, things like nuts and seeds, pulses and beans, they're complex carbohydrates. So what's the difference? Well, simple carbohydrates have very little fibre in them, and when we eat them, our body digests them quickly, and they rapidly release sugar or glucose that gets into our bloodstream very quickly. So you might have heard of sugar spikes. If you had a piece of bread or a piece of chocolate, a glass of Coke, you're going to get this big spike very quickly because they're very quick to digest, and they release this amount of sugar into our bloodstream. Now, our body has to really tightly manage the amount of sugar in our blood, because too much of it is really bad for us. Okay, it basically sort of puts this sort of the sticky sugary residues into all of the tiny veins and capillaries all over our bodies and can cause a whole lot of problems. That's why diabetes is such a serious problem. That's what causes the complications that come with diabetes to a larger extent. So as soon as we get this rush of glucose into our blood, our body releases insulin, and insulin's job is to shuttle that blood sugar out of the blood and get it out and put it into three places: either our liver, our muscles, or when those places are full, it gets turned into fat and gets put into our fat stores. So that's what's happening when we eat a lot of sugar or a lot of simple carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates, on the other hand, have got a lot of fibre in them. Okay, so broccoli would be a complex carbohydrate, and the fibre in there is helping the body to digest it much more slowly, so that we don't get this sugar spike. We get a lower and more sustained level of glucose hitting our bloodstream that gives us much more of a sort of a level response. And the complex carbohydrates have got fibre, as I said, that's what makes them complex. That's great for our gut microbiome, we talked about that before. And all of those complex carbohydrates have also got lots of vitamins and minerals, some healthy fats, other nutrients in there that our body has a use for. Whereas, sadly, the simple carbohydrates, the bread, the pasta, the biscuits, they really don't have a lot of other nutrition in there other than this sort of quick to digest glucose, the quick energy form. So that's how we start to think about classifying carbohydrates to simple and complex. Now, as always, we're looking at these things through the lens of being a peri or post-menopausal woman. And one of the things that we now know happens to women sort of post-menopause is they start to become more insulin resistant. Okay, now what that means in a nutshell, without going into the sort of science of it, is that we can't actually cope with or process as many of the simple carbs as we used to be able to when we were younger. Okay, so when we were younger, we might have been able to go and eat cake and lots of meals out, lots of bread, lots of pizza, and it didn't make a difference to our waistline. All right, but what's happening now is when we're eating those same foods, our body's struggling to clear out that excess glucose that's hitting our bloodstream, and more of it's getting stored as fat. It can start to cause other issues with inflammation. So we just don't handle it as well. And that can be one of the reasons that women can notice that they're putting on weight, but know that they just eating the same as what they used to. Okay, so they haven't changed what they're eating. They're not eating more, but they're putting on weight. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons for that could be this issue with insulin resistance, that you're not handling that food so well anymore. And because we can't cope with sugar in our blood, it's got to go somewhere. The easiest place to put it, and the biggest store that we have, is our fat stores, because they're practically unlimited. Okay, so what does that mean? Okay, does that mean carbohydrates are off the menu? Can we not eat them? The way I like to encourage people to think about it is to be selective about the carbohydrates that you do and don't eat, and just be mindful of what we're eating and start to choose them wisely. So for example, something that pick the things that you like the most to eat them. It's wise when you look at the simple carbohydrates to try and cut those down and replace them with more of the complex carbohydrates, which, if we're following this idea about the plant-based, increasing the amount of plant-based foods that we're having, we're naturally doing that. But we also want to start pulling back slightly on the amount of bread, pasta, rice we have. And pulling back doesn't mean none, it just means fewer. Because we're all different. I don't know how many carbohydrates you can cope with well, neither do you. We have to sort of start to play around with it and see what makes us feel our best, because we do need some carbohydrates. We don't have to go onto some ketogenic diet where we literally cut all the carbs out and basically eating protein and fat and lettuce. We don't have to go down to that extreme. We want to find a way of eating that we can live with, that makes us feel good, but that we know is actually making us healthy on the inside as well. So I like to think a bit about just shifting the balance of what we're eating. Rather than cutting anything out, we're having a bit more protein to keep us full. We're having more complex carbohydrates, vegetables, nuts, seeds, spices, pulses. And then if we still want to have some rice on our plate, or a few potatoes, or a bit of pasta, fine, we're adults, we can choose that. And when you start to eat those things anyway as part of a more balanced plate or a more balanced meal, i.e. protein, a little bit of healthy fat, plenty of veg, and a little bit of pasta, that's going to help to slow down the rate at which the glucose is released into our blood anyway. Okay, so we can have these things if we eat them in a way that helps to minimize the negative impact that they have. So when I was younger, we would have spaghetti bolognese was like one of our regular family dinners, and pasta's cheap, meat back then not so cheap. So we'd all have these huge piles of pasta with a little blob of sauce on the top. Or my nana used to make it that she just would stir the sauce through it, so it just was almost bolognese flavoured pasta with a little bit extra on the top if you were lucky. And if you imagine how that is on a plate, maybe 85% of what you would be eating in a meal like that would be the pasta and the carbohydrates. We want to just shift that around. So now I would make a bolognese sauce with meat. I might put lentils in it. I'll have mushrooms, carrots, courgettes, and a little bit of pasta. So we're just flipping the ratios around. And that's a good way of choosing your carbs wisely and combining them in a different way to make them still part of your diet so you can enjoy them, but they're going to have a different effect on your body. I also recommend that you think about what you like and what you don't like, because there can be some things, I was chatting to someone earlier today who doesn't really care for bread, so she doesn't bother having it, but she enjoys rice. I'm not really fussed about rice, I'm not really fussed about pasta or potatoes, but I do like the odd slice of bread. I do like the odd piece of chocolate as well. So I'm selective about what I will and won't have. So that's how I like to think about carbs. I eat as many complex carbs as I can. I really enjoy vegetables, so I'm lucky in that respect, and make them as big a part of your meal as you can. Just cut back on the not so healthy ones. Another thing to think about then is we don't just eat carbohydrates because we're used to making meals that say a pasta as a regular diet that we can easily just change the ratios of. Carbohydrates are very easy food for us to grab hold of quickly. And this is an issue I find that women, because we're busy, can quite often have built up habits where we become quite reliant on just putting a piece of toast in the toaster for a morning, and then getting to mid-morning and being at work and being so starving because we've only had toast, that when the biscuits come out or we're in the works canteen and there's nothing decent, we'll grab a cereal bar, and we're eating we're almost relying on eating lots of carbohydrates to keep us going all day. That's not healthy. But if we talk about then having more protein and just changing our meals, we can eliminate that need for us to keep snacking on carbohydrates, so we don't need it. We've got more balanced, more sustained energy all day. So we might want to look at our overall eating habits and look at where we're using carbohydrates as a convenient way of just getting a quick source of energy, because we need it, when we aren't prepared and don't have better options with us. Okay, so that's something to think about. We'll be covering this, we'll talk about this more regularly actually in the real live stuff of the programme. The other thing is to recognise that quite often we can develop over time bad habits, because they aren't great habits, where we want dessert after every meal, or we have chocolate with our coffee every day, and it's not because we're hungry necessarily or we've got cravings per se, it's just because we're in the routine of having those things and we like them. I want to take the blame away from you on that, because we live in a world where we're just marketed at to eat chocolate and to have treats and to be treat wise and to have a little bit of everything does you good, and we can very easily build these things into our lives very regularly. You know, I've had quite severe chocolate habits in my life in the past. Eating 3 bars of chocolate a day, it's very easy to do that, and it's just worth noticing and being aware that we probably do have to start to rethink those things and look at some of the underlying reasons about why we might have those foods. Again, I'm going to talk about that separately, but carbohydrates is complicated because none of us have a problem with eating bits of ham in between meals, or every time we go to fill our cars up we grab a pack of chicken. It just doesn't happen. So carbohydrates have got a very sneaky way of just sort of weaving themselves into our lives, so we're eating more than we need. All right, so that's something that we just need to be aware of and start to think about what we want to eat, what our boundaries are, and just gradually shift into sort of a healthier pattern. That doesn't mean we have to cut them out, because that's not what I would be endorsing, but maybe we just think about a time and a place, or how often we have those things, rather than feeling like we have to eliminate them, and just being a little bit more selective and a little bit more mindful. But boundaries is something I will save for another video. At the moment, all we want to know is think about is carbohydrates and what the different types of carbohydrates are, the simple versus the complex, how they're affecting our body, the glucose spikes, they affect the amount of cravings that we have, they affect how quickly we start to feel hungry after a meal, lots of things. So that's why carbs are such a complex thing. And especially if you think about processed food like biscuits, cakes, and sugary things, they taste amazing, you know, and they're designed for us to be made for us to really crave them and to really want to eat them. So again, that's part of the food environment that we all live in and shop in, you know, and our kids are putting us under pressure to be in. And we have to sort of think about how we unpick all of this and try and find a way of eating carbs that works well for us. Okay, that's quite a lot to take in. Don't worry about it too much. We've got plenty of opportunity to just keep having these conversations and figure out what the best way of eating for us. But again, if you go to the recipe section, you'll find they've all got carbohydrates in different amounts, and you can add and take away. And again, as I said before, it's about finding what works for you. Okay, food for thought. But this is something that the journey that we're all going on together to just work all this out and find a healthy diet for us that makes us feel good, but also that we enjoy. Okay, see you in the next video.